just wanted to make sure that I got the recording going again. Thank you all for attending. And just so people are aware, Catherine Dimitruk is out of the office, not feeling well. So Bethany Remmers, who is the Assistant Director of the Regional Planning Commission, is going to play the role of facilitator. So Bethany, would you like to just say a few words about yourself? Maybe many people know you, but if not.
Absolutely. So I recognize a lot of faces on the line, but not all. But I'm Bethany Remmers, Assistant Director with the Regional Planning Commission. And while I primarily do transportation, over the years, it has many intersections with water quality. So I feel like I'm very familiar with the Missisquoi Basin, and also have been involved with the Upper Missisquoi Wild and Scenic Committee through the years as well. So I'm glad to join you all this morning. And Dean, would you like me to just start with the agenda, or is there any other announcements before we officially start?
I had no other announcements, and I can share the agenda so that it is on the screen again, so people can see it if they don't happen to have a copy open. So right now, everyone should be able to see the agenda, which at the top does note that there's some possible changes that the group might want to consider, which have to do with a spot on the agenda for public comment, which is generally considered a requirement of public meetings. And we did not include approval of the minutes. There's no statutory requirement for approving minutes, but many bodies like to do that. So if the group wants to make any adjustments to the agenda, it might want to consider those.
So excellent. So Dean has outlined some possible additions to the agenda. Are there any other additions or changes that the group would like to make? Hearing none, Dean, would you like a motion to approve the adjustments, or I think consensus on this?
I think it's entirely up to you as facilitator. It never hurts in my view, but that's just my bias.
All right, so if someone could motion approving the changes to the agenda, which include adding a public comment period and approval of your last council minutes, I would take that motion.
So moved.
I'm just hearing from Beth.
Yes.
Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
And who was the second?
Kendra Lindsay.
Excellent, thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Nay? Any abstentions? Excellent. So Dean, those changes have been approved. So now let's get into we've done some welcomes, but let's continue and do introductions. And when you introduce yourself, in addition to your name, if you could also remind us of what sector you're representing on the council, and anything else you'd like to share. And what I'll do is I will just go through randomly on the list and say your name, and if you could proceed from there. So I'm going to start with Dan.
Dan Seeley, I'm at Richford, and I guess I'm section 7.
And so let's move on to Kent.
Kent Henderson, chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain.
Thank you, Kent. And Beth?
Beth Torpy, I'm the water quality planner for NVDA, Northeastern Vermont Development Association.
And Jake?
Yes, good morning. My name is Jake Kucher from Westfield. I'm on the Westfield Select Board, and I think I'm an alternate for municipalities. Is that correct? And then while I'm saying that, I assume that I shouldn't be voting, right? Unless I'm filling in for somebody. Is that correct? Because I didn't vote on the minutes and so on. Just thinking that was the case. Thank you.
Yes,
you're confirming that, Dean?
Yes. Thanks for asking.
Okay, how about let's move on to Tom.
Hi, Tom Briselden. I'm the alternate for Friends of Northern Lake Champlain.
Excellent. And is it Alaire?
Hi, I'm Alaire Diamond, ecologist at Vermont Land Trust, and I am representing the nonprofit sector. And I want to apologize in advance that I'm going to be needing to leave at 9 o'clock today.
Understandable. Thank you for being here. Barry.
Barry Lamke with NRPC.
Lauren.
Lauren Weston, District Manager of the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District. I have to leave at 9:30.
Okay, we'll be efficient. How about Lindsay?
I'm Lindsay White. I'm the Director of the Missisquoi River Basin Association and also the Upper Missisquoi and Trout Rivers Wild and Scenic Committee.
Karen?
Hi, Karen Bates from the Agency of Natural Resources and the Water Investment Division as the Basin Planner for the Missisquoi Bay Watershed.
Morning, Karen. And I believe Sarah joined us. Sarah,
yes.
You able to introduce yourself?
Yes, I don't have video for some odd reason. Sarah Downs and I'm chair of the Enosburg Conservation Commission.
And sorry, you have been on the line. I'm losing track here. Let's move over to Dean.
Hi, Dean Pierce, NRPC and QUIS staff.
And Dea.
Hi, I'm Dea, and I'm also with the NRPC.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody? Oh, Abraham, are you on the line?
Hi there. Sorry, I wasn't sure I was joining this morning, but plans changed fast. So here I am. I'm a little late.
Morning. So anyone else that I missed? Perfect. So let's move on to item number 3, which is election of a chair and vice chair. And Dean, I imagine that this has been a point of conversation from your first meeting?
Before we do that, just because the amended agenda notes that there is a spot for public comment, if there's anybody who is not a representative who would like to make a comment concerning some item that is not on the agenda today, they would have an opportunity to do that now. I'm not sure that anyone is in that boat, but perhaps. And if not, then yes, I would be happy to go to the issue of the election of the chair and vice chair.
Excellent, and thank you. I was looking at my old agenda, so correct me when I get to 4B as well.
Okay.
Is there any? Oh, perfect, Dean.
Yes, I will just say a few words on this topic. There are rules that accompany the Clean Water Act, Act 76, that we are working under. And those rules specifically say that the councils will appoint a chair and vice chair that will fill 1-year terms that can be re-elected. And the role of the chair is to guide the planning and facilitation of the meetings. And the vice chair, as you might expect, will fill in when the chair is not available. We felt that it wasn't necessarily fair to the group to put you in a spot at your very first meeting to elect a chair. We wanted people to have a chance to learn a little bit about the council and the process and each other before doing that. So we have on the agenda today election of chair and vice chair if people are prepared for that. And so it is, I suppose the floor is open to nominations for chair or expressions of interest in serving as chair. And if there are none, well, then we'll deal with that.
And I did I did my quick read over of Robert's rules this morning, and you can nominate yourself, which I wasn't aware of. So nominations for chair are now open. Do we have any nominations from the floor?
Fame and fortune await. Maybe not fortune. Sorry about that.
And maybe if we don't, you'll give some people some time. But Dean, maybe if we don't get any nominations this morning, maybe it's some outreach in between the second and third meeting to see who might have interest. But I see Lauren has unmuted herself.
I will nominate myself as chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Any other nominations? Hearing none, I would accept a motion to close nominations for chair.
So moved.
Thank you, Beth. Do we have a second to close nominations?
Second.
Kent has second. All those in favor of closing nominations for chair?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we have any opposed? Say nay. And then abstentions? We'll assume that these abstentions coming from our alternates. Excellent. So I believe Robert's rules is, so we've closed nominations. And so now we actually do the vote on the chair. Is everyone's corrections from folks that serve on councils? I believe that's what we do. Actually, we can open nominations for vice chair, then we can vote as a slate. So I'm going to open up the floor to nominations for the vice chair position.
This is Kent, and Barry, I hope that I'm not stepping on your toes. Would it be permissible if I nominated you as vice chair?
Always permissible. I might respectfully decline.
Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot. I apologize.
No worries.
All right, giving into pressure, I will nominate myself. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Lindsay. Do we have any other nominations for the vice chair position? Hearing none, I accept a motion to close nominations.
So moved.
Kent has motioned. Do we have a second?
Second.
Dan has seconded. Thank you, Dan. All those in favor of closing nominations for the vice chair, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So now we'll move on to the actual vote. And I believe it's permissible for us to vote on the slate of officers. Unless I hear any objections to that. So I would be looking for a motion to approve the slate as presented, which is Lauren Weston as chair and Lindsay White as vice chair of the council.
I move to approve that slate.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? And any abstentions?
Do Lindsay and I need to abstain?
I don't, you're allowed to vote for yourself.
Okay. I know you said that, but still.
No, you can nominate yourself, vote for yourself, I believe.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm hearing none. Congratulations. The council now has a slate of officers, Dean.
Wow.
Lauren, I know that you have to leave early, but would you like to take over as chair in the meantime, or would you like to have a little bit of a grace period?
I would love a grace period for the rest of the meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So moving on in our agenda, I believe we're turning things over to Dean now for a discussion of the bylaws. Is that correct, Dean?
Yes, that's correct. And if people are ready, then I will jump right in. I'm hoping people can see on the screen a slide that addresses this topic. Just as I was showing the language in the rules that specifies the need to elect a chair and vice chair, the contract that the QUISP have with DEC indicates that the QUISP, working with you, the council members, need to develop rules of procedure, rules for your meetings and other policies. So I had included in the meeting packet a draft, and I will walk through those. I will add that I've caught some typos and other types of mistakes that I will address. We have to work with you to develop rules that are consistent with state law, and we'll get into some of those details, but a high level overview of the sections you should see on the slide now. Major sections, the legal basis for the creation of the council. We should just be sure about what the official name of the council will be. The proposed bylaws include the purpose of the council, as well as membership, and then the structure, the organizational leadership, which we've already done somewhat with the election of chair, the election process, which we have improvised up to this point, but under Bethany's able guidance, we have followed Robert's rules quite nicely, I think. The duties of the officers, and then sections on the minutes, how they are called, and special meetings, and notice, those things, and then rules of procedure as a part of the bylaws having to do with the decision-making process and meeting agendas and public comment and things like that. Then lastly, a section on conflict of interest. For those of you who were here at the last meeting, Catherine Dimitrick gave a presentation on open meeting law and public records. Conflict of interest is another important area that is along those same lines. And then the final section of the bylaws has to do with amending the bylaws. So I'm going to stop sharing this document and pull up the draft bylaw document itself. So I'm hoping people can see those now. Okay, great. This will be a little bit tedious, perhaps, but it is necessary. I will plow through this as quickly as I can, but I don't want people to feel rushed. We also want to make clear that we see this discussion taking place both at this meeting and your next meeting, with the possibility of the bylaws being adopted at the next meeting. So we're not trying to get them all settled today. There will be discussion at the upcoming meeting. So as mentioned, one of the first questions is, what will this group actually want to refer to itself as? The basin is known officially as the Missisquoi Bay Basin. It also has a number. It's referred to as Basin 6. I imagine that most people don't, at least those in the public, don't know about what Basin 6 is versus Basin 5. But I would be interested in any feedback on the name of the council. We didn't plug that in, but if I had, I would have included Missisquoi Bay Basin Water Quality Council, or BWQC, or the council. Does anybody have any objections to the bylaws referring to the Missisquoi Basin Water Quality Council? Because this is the document that is going to be the working version as we go forward.
Dean, I have a question.
Yes, Ken.
I've got a question about calling it Missisquoi Bay Basin. Do we represent Highgate Springs, which is on Missisquoi Bay, or is the Highgate Springs section in the direct lake basin? And it's just it's a small point, but
yeah. I'm going to pull up the map I believe that Highgate's, I'm gonna say I will pull up that map at some point, but if it's critical to determine, the reason that Missisquoi Bay is used is because for planning purposes, the Missisquoi watershed as well as the Rock and Pike watersheds are included. So perhaps Karen, you know off the top of your head, Karen Bates, and can answer that more quickly than I can pull up a map, but I believe the answer is yes.
So I can answer that because we have lots of discussions about that, Kent. The Basin 5 is the direct runoff to the lake outside of large river basins. And so for that reason, I think it's Highgate Springs. There's an area along the shoreline that is considered Basin 5, actually. So I would look at a map as well to confirm, but that's a little awkward for the Basin 5, Basin 6 transition.
I just have a comment, and this is just purely from the perspective of somebody who's closer to the other side of the state, is that when I think of Missisquoi Bay, I think of only Lake Champlain, and it seems so far away. I don't seem connected to it. I don't know if that's a weird comment or not, but would it be easier to just leave it as Missisquoi or Missisquoi River? It seems more representative of the entire basin. When I hear the bay, I just think of only Lake Champlain.
It's the Rock and the Pike as well. I mean, could do the Missisquoi, Rock and Pike watershed. That would be most accurate.
It may be accurate. It is true. It does become more of a mouthful, or more letters as far as an acronym. I think probably that was some of the thinking that went into referring to it as Missisquoi Bay.
How about Missisquoi River?
It doesn't include the Pike and the Rock then, because they come out different places.
How about just Missisquoi?
Yeah, I hear Beth's concerns certainly operating outside of the Bay Direct region, but I mean, I think the only real solution to be totally accurate and inclusive would be to say like the Missisquoi Region Basin Water Quality Council, and that's even more of a mouthful and awkward. So I think we've been handling being the Missisquoi Bay Basin for a long time. I'm fine with that.
That's fine.
And that's why I brought it up, because I definitely wanted to recognize the upriver folks and not just have it focus, you know, on these areas. I mean, you know, that's where our watershed group is going to be providing projects from that very area. And so I just wanted to be really sure about which basin we were working in.
And Dean, I don't know if it helps or if it hurts, but I mean, I'm looking at the DEC's basin map, and I'm seeing Highgate Springs is listed in, I mean, as far as the map I'm looking at, it's in Missisquoi Bay Basin. I'm not seeing a carve out. I don't know if you want me to share my screen to kind of confirm I'm identifying Highgate Springs correctly, or if Karen has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we had, Matt may be wrong. We were, we had that discussion about, you know, when you're calculating loading, where is that going to come from for Basin 5 versus Basin 6 when Philip was doing the calculations. And so that one of those changed. I will get back. I'll definitely contact then my people and we can have that answered. But I mean, it's a really good question, because in terms of what projects are going to, that you guys will take on to meet your required P reduction, you need to be in the right location.
And Karen, when you get that comfort, when you get that answer, could you also confirm there is a piece of Alberg that is shown in the Missisquoi Bay Basin. So getting clarification of what the correct map is, I think, would be of interest to this group.
Okay, will do.
So Dean, do you, it seems like the group, two main contenders are being Missisquoi or Missisquoi Bay. Do you want to try to get to consensus now, or is this something we want to get information from Karen on before and then bring it to the next meeting?
My own view is that perhaps between now and the next meeting, we can just bracket the word bay, and that it would be something that the group would need to resolve at its next meeting. I'm thinking that may be the path forward.
Excellent.
And if that's acceptable, then in the purpose statement, the language is pretty straightforward. I will just try to quickly read it. Accomplish the duties of a Basin Water Quality Council as detailed in the Act and the rules. It mentions that DEC appropriates the funds to the QUISP for projects that improve water quality, and the council shall assist the QUISP in prioritizing projects that may access these funds. So I'm hoping that for now, that seems like a reasonable statement of purpose. And if there are no objections, we can move on to the membership. This is where I've caught some of the typos or omissions having to do with numbering and things like that. But the membership of the council, this is set out in the Act and the rule, consists of 9 members. There is a procedure for additional members. It does start to get complicated, which is why we haven't tried to summarize it and have just proposed making reference to that fact that it's possible in the Act in the second sentence. Membership, keep it simple, say that it's done in accordance with the Act and the rule. And that's helpful because should the Act and the rule change, then this can be, the procedure will follow from it. Voting, it's 1 person, 1 vote. When councils are expanded, that's something that does get changed with the voting. So 1 member, 1 vote keeps it straight. If additional members were added, then that would need to be changed. But for now, it's very simple. Any questions so far before I move forward? Okay. We are proposing something that may generate some discussion. We would like as much participation as we can. Some bylaws for organizations have provisions in them where the chair can notify the sponsoring body or the group or interest that a member represents and say to them when someone has not been attending meetings. So we have included that kind of language. And anyway, happy to take any feedback on that.
You may just want to have some language in there about the alternate. So if the alternate is there 2 meetings in a row, is that a problem?
There's absolutely, yeah. There is language on alternates. There's no problem with alternates would be fulfilling their role when they participate in place of the member. So yeah, perhaps when we get to the alternate section, we can address that, Barry. I'm not sure if what the question is or the comment is there, are you wondering about an expectation of attendance by alternates when they haven't been called in, so to speak?
No, my only comment is that if the primary member is not there for 2 consecutive meetings, but the alternate is, are we notifying that entity or not? But we can talk about it with the alternate as well.
Yeah, well, my take on this would be that the organization or the realm or the sector that the member represents would be notified. The alternate is doing their job, and so hats off to them. it may be this situation where the roles should switch. If someone is a member, the full member, but they're not able to attend meeting, and someone who's designated as the alternate is showing up and participating, then perhaps the sector that those folks represent would have a conversation and decide that the roles should actually switch. But that would come about as a result of the sector being notified that the member is not attending meetings.
And Dean, I see we have Lauren first with a comment or question, and then Alaire.
This is a semantic question, but is the appropriate entity the members organization or the council itself? Who gets notified?
Yeah, the language should be clearer perhaps than it is. It is whatever group or body is involved when the member is originally selected. So in the case of the conservation districts, it would be the conservation districts, which if I'm remembering correctly, were coordinated through your state association. So it would be that.
Okay. So the sponsoring entity or something like that.
And there was another hand.
Yeah, I guess I had a similar question of just clarification in here, like what does notice mean? Is it 24 hours? Is it notifying an alternate and seeing if they can come instead? Is it sending a text message at 7:59? Like what is notice?
Okay, so I'm not sure that this goes, I don't recall that we have addressed the specific process for a member to tell a alternate. I'm going to try to see. Yeah, I don't think that that's been spelled out, so that could be something that we add or at least discuss. It's probably not reasonable for a member to text somebody 5 minutes before and say, I can't make it.
Right.
But that would be for the group to decide what constitutes a reasonable heads up to the alternate.
And yeah, exactly. That's why I just thought it would be important to spell that out, and also to think about assuming that notification would it go to Lauren as the chair, or would it go to you, Dean, as the QUISP representative?
I'm just making a note here. I think that's something that could be discussed. I think at a minimum, notifying staff would be a reasonable procedure, and then the staff would have the responsibility to inform the chair that a member is able to attend, and that the alternates would be informed that their services may be required. That would be a minimum. I think otherwise it puts some burden on people who wouldn't necessarily be able to act on it as well. Yeah. But I think it would fall on the staff.
That makes sense to me.
I think you had a question or comment.
Yeah. So you've answered my first question. So I've got an idea who to notify. We are going to work on it. And maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but does this include special meetings that may be called? Or because I'm kind of confused, we're going to be doing these monthly meetings for a while and then jump into quarterly meetings and just trying to get around it.
Is your question, Ken, would missing a special meeting count amongst the two? If someone, yeah. Yes. I suppose it would, and maybe what this, maybe what your comment suggests is adding something like excluding special meetings, because that may be unfair for someone because it's not on their calendar. What would adding something like that do to your issue here?
Yeah,
Because
just so it's understood, that's all.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. So. Okay, so we will track the issue having to do with notification process. We've proposed this additional language here. Is there anything more on attendance that we would like to discuss right now? Okay.
In theory, sorry, Dean.
No, go ahead, Lauren.
Just thinking about the hybrid potential nature of future meetings. I don't know if we need to add any language about attendance on Zoom is acceptable if there's a hybrid meeting and we have some people in person, or if there needs to be language around all that good virtual meeting.
Yeah, I think when we come to meetings, we can cover some of that ground, but my own thought is that given the large size of the basin, that continuing to offer Zoom or online option makes a lot of sense. So hold that thought until we get to meetings, but I agree. I think that there shouldn't be any distinction between attending in person or attending online if the meeting is a hybrid meeting. Okay. Just looking ahead here for something. Yeah. I am mindful of time. I know some people have to leave at 9. Eligibility for office. These are really just those 2 positions of chair and vice chair, in accordance with Article 7, which have to do with those rules. Alternates. This is, alternates are allowed and expressly allowed in those, the regulations, the rules, I should say. We have taken care of this by admitting alternates at the very first meeting. They've been recognized. Something that might come up in the future, I'm aware of it in another basin, not in this one, where additional folks might express interest in being made alternates. And then the question is whether or not hands are tied because the language and rule says they'll be established at the first meeting. Maybe if you as a body see the possibility of, let's say an alternate drops off, or let's say there's a current vacancy, there's one more spot that's available as an alternate, and someone comes forward 3 months from now, is this language problematic? Should it say alternate members shall be established at the first meeting, or should it just say alternate members shall be established at a meeting of the council so that hands are not tied? Because I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll just stop there and let people react.
I think it makes sense to do what you just suggested, Dean, just to change that to shall be established at a meeting. So many pieces of this process are still evolving. It seems like we don't want to limit ourselves to something that we already can't change now if we leave it at that, because we already had our first meeting.
Right. Okay. So moving on, if that's all right. Officers, chair and vice chair, those are the ones that are required. We had some internal discussion about whether there's a need for a secretary or anything like that, but we didn't we didn't see that since we will be handling minutes. And we've also just handled the fact that when the chair and the vice chair haven't been elected, that it's going to be handled by, well, executive director or the person who's acting on their behalf. That's pretty boilerplate. Section 503 on committees, we think that it's possible, if not likely, that the council would create committees. So we wanted it to be included in the bylaws. Tom's raised his hand.
Yeah, just a quick question on committees. Will they be subject to the open meeting laws?
Yeah, in my opinion, yes. I think Catherine would say the same thing, but I will defer to Bethany.
No, I believe that they fall under, they're subject to all the bylaws of this council, which specify following the open meeting law. So that's my interpretation as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Ken has a comment.
Are you envisioning these to be permanent committees or ad hoc committees that would only operate for a defined short period of time? And does that need to be spelled out in bylaws?
My thought, Ken, is that they could be either. I think that more likely would be a committee created to deal with something specific, and so that the first committee created might not be a standing committee, so-called, but I think that it's entirely possible that the council might at some point create a committee that persists, and if or when that happens, then my guess would be that the bylaws could be changed to recognize the committee specifically. But at this point, I'm saying they could be either as a result of this language. It would be for the council to decide.
Okay, understood.
If no other questions, the QUISP provides support, and the Regional Planning Commission, Northwest Regional Planning Commission specifically is the QUISP for this basin. So that's fairly boilerplate. So going forward, the election process would be spelled out. Now, this is something that we had made a note could be discussed by the group. The process that Bethany led the group through earlier seemed to work well, but some groups feel like the process should be formalized through the creation of a nominating committee. So the question for the group really is, does it seem like going forward, the election of the chair and vice chair should be done through a nominating committee process? And if not, then we would revise this language. What do people think about that?
I don't know that we need a nominating committee, but can we change it if we decide that we do later?
Yeah, short answer is yes.
That would be my vote, is to just kind of do what we just did and see how that goes again.
Jake, you have a comment?
Yeah, my comment was that sure, what we did today works fine, but having a nominating committee might be able to vet more candidates, not to make it a contested type of thing, but maybe get a chance to get some input from possible contenders. You know, again, not to make it complicated, but as opposed to having to nominate yourself, if you're interested, just a thought, but I could go either way.
Blair, you have a thought on that?
Can we just say the chair may, at their discretion, appoint a nominating committee? And leave it up for a conversation.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Sarah about that approach. Dean, do you think that would fit into, is that allowed to be at the discretion of the chair?
I think the bylaws can say what this council believes is the procedure that should guide the council. It's kind of a neither fish nor fowl kind of thing in my mind. I'm struggling with that because under what circumstances would the chair decide that it should be one way or the other? Does it really come down just to the preferences of the chair? It seems maybe just entirely subjective without some indication of what the chair should consider. I'm uncomfortable with it, I guess. Either the rules should say, or the bylaw should say that they're done from the floor or it's done through a nominating committee. You know, it could be something like in whatever month of the year following, the chair shall appoint the nominating committee made up of 3 members unless the full council votes to use a nomination from the floor process or something like that. That puts it in the hands of the body where I think it belongs. And that's what this language is for. It's reflecting what the body as a whole thinks. So anyway, I'll stop babbling and any other thoughts? This could be something that gets considered and perhaps worked over a bit between now and the next meeting. Okay, so that brings us to the election. It's elected by the members present and voting. Terms of office. So this is something that is I believe also flows from rule, but I will double check on that, that the positions of the chair and vice chair are 1-year positions, even though the positions of that you hold as council members are 2-year positions. And you hold the position until your successor has been elected and installed. And then something for discussion is that officers will serve for a maximum of 3 consecutive terms. So for 3, there would be a cap, and that may be something that people do not want to see, but it is put in for your consideration and discussion. And Barry has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just back to the last one for a sec. Any need to mention proxies? It says present and voting.
Yeah, my reaction is that my own view is I'm not a big fan of proxies in public bodies, and particularly with meetings being possible remotely, that there's not a lot of need for them. So that's just my view. Members may feel differently. But I believe that this language is intentional. Being present includes participation remotely. I believe that's under Vermont interpretation of the open meeting law. If there's nothing more on that, the question of the terms 1 year, if that's okay. There's the paragraph on vacancies. So if the chair was to move away, the vice chair would become the chair until the next time that the vacancy, so that would be at the end of the term.
One comment, and I could be wrong on this. So let's say no one else gets nominated or accepts a nomination in a year. Is the existing chair then required to stay on? No, okay. I'm just asking hypothetically.
Yeah. I think I've heard that question before in other contexts. There's no way to handcuff the chair to their position. It would put a moral burden on them, I suppose, but there's nothing that would prevent that person from stepping down in the end. I don't think you can force that. Yeah, so what this is saying is essentially that the vice chair spot will remain open until election. So if the chair moved away and the vice chair became the chair, then we do have the question of, well, what if the person who was the vice chair becomes the chair and then they move away? We would have to resolve that. And this is one of the limitations of having just two officers, because there's the pecking order doesn't go any further. Is there any other feedback on this section? Okay, continue on. 701, we are suggesting that council members make reports back to their sector or realm, or however we want to call it. This is something that is a suggestion from us. There's nothing in statute that says that it needs to happen or must happen, I should say, but it seems like it would be a good idea. And if there aren't any objections, okay, getting more specific about the role of the chair. What are they doing and how much time? Well, not specifically how much time it would take, but to give you, Lauren, some idea of the time it might take. You'll be guiding the planning and facilitation of the meetings with us as staff. You do the customary duties, and you can cast a vote unless you have, if you wish to abstain or you have a conflict of interest, and that's something that we will be talking about. And we've added this line at the end of this paragraph because of the desire that's been expressed having to do with the work of these councils to do things by consensus as much as possible and as open a way as possible. We realize that certain activities like prioritization and adoption of a priority list, that needs to take place through a vote, most likely, but there are other things that it's possible that can be resolved just through consensus. And so we think that it's important for that to be mentioned. Any thoughts on that? Okay.
Do we need to spell out what consensus means?
Well, I would respond that it's a dictionary definition, but if we want to define it, consensus is not unanimity. Is that the crux of the issue for you? Does consensus mean unanimity?
I guess there's like process-based approaches to establishing consensus and doing like go around rounds and giving thumbs up, some thumbs sideways, and all of these like things we could be doing. And I just didn't know if we're like doing a formal version of consensus or like consensus is we consent.
Yeah, my view would be that that's an appropriate thing for the chair to show their own style on. So I think thumbs up,
Great.
thumbs sideways sounds good.
Okay. I'll review those notes.
And one thing I'll just offer is, you know, I imagine that when Catherine joins next meeting, I know she and others have had lots of experience of dealing with consensus and councils. And so between her and Lauren, you know, there might be some guidance or some best practices that come out of that discussion.
Good point, good point. I'm mindful of the fact that it's 9 a.m. We've been plugging through this quite a bit. We don't have to get this done today, so perhaps we would put a placeholder here, take a short break, maybe a 3-minute break, and then come back and tackle the rest of the agenda. How does that sound, folks? I suppose I should ask you, Madam Chair, or Chairperson. How does that sound?
So why don't we, it's 9 o'clock, so let's do, can we do 9:04? And I know some people have to get off the line, so thanks to everyone if for the folks that are leaving at 9. Meeting, correct, Dean? And so this went out in the meeting notice. So I will, unless there's specific questions or corrections with Dean, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes. We'll get a first and a second, and then after that, if there's any corrections, we'll address them.
I'm hoping everyone can see the minutes on the screen.
I just have a question as to if we need to be listing what association we are a part of, the council members' attendance list.
So for you, Lauren, it would be listing the Franklin County.
Right.
And then that you're representing this sector.
Correct. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if that's a requirement of the minutes or not. It's more of a question than a request.
Yeah. In my view, Lauren, the answer would be no, although some groups in their minutes or attached to their minutes will have a table, and I think the Regional Planning Commission does this, that they will use the table like an attendance sheet, and that would have their name. It could be the pleasure of the group, though. It's not a requirement of the minutes. We just need to know who is attending, who makes motions, what the results of those motions are, and a summary of the discussion. But we could add that to the next version. We could include a table, as I said. This is something that I can address a little bit more because of the comment that I have about in the draft agenda. I have listed the word, or I should say, in the agenda that was adopted, I wrote approval of minutes, ? And then I had the word procedure. And I have a little spiel to give having to do with procedure that I will probably save until we know for sure that there aren't other issues having to do with the minutes. And then I will explain if that's okay. But yes, duly noted that we could include the organization or the sector that the person is involved in the minutes.
And Kent, you have a comment or question?
Yes. In regards to guests, would that be a time to recognize the organization that they are representing if they are presenting public comment on our meeting? Would there be any reason to identify the organization that these guests are representing when they are providing their public comments?
I think that when in a future meeting, if someone, like, let's just say because Peter was participating in the last meeting, if Peter had made a set of comments during the meeting and said, I'm Peter and I'm with the Franklin Watershed Committee and I'm here to say, et cetera, then the minutes could indicate that it's the person in their orientation or their representation. If that's what you're asking, the minutes would do that. If someone speaks and they don't say that they're speaking for an organization, or they don't have an organization that they're representing, then we wouldn't have the minutes indicate that.
Okay, but it would be recorded somehow, one way or the other, in the minutes. That's all I'm getting at.
If someone says that they are speaking for an organization, I think we can make every effort for the minutes to indicate that they are speaking for that organization. If someone is a member of an organization and they don't indicate that they're speaking for that organization, then I don't think we would assume that they're speaking for that organization and put that in the minutes, because we wouldn't know it unless, we wouldn't know it.
Any other comments or questions before we take a motion to approve? And we'll have these comments noted in the minutes.
So when I addressed this issue of procedure, I had a conversation with someone, Dea, about this just yesterday. I would propose that it be the practice of the council to indicate the changes in the minutes. So we won't go back and revise the minutes that were posted. Going forward, we would have a statement in every set of minutes that says when there's a discussion about edits to the minutes, they will be in the current minutes. We will not go back and edit. What that means is someone going to the website can read a set of minutes, but they wouldn't know with absolute certainty that everything in them is truth unless they go to the next minutes and see that nothing about those minutes was changed. I can imagine this generating some discussion. Some bodies in the area that I live, a lot of select boards do things that way because it's just less of an organizational burden to go back and modify minutes. So our plan, my plan and suggestion to the group is that, as I think Bethany just mentioned, our minutes for today will note the comments that have been made about the minutes for last time, but we won't go back in time to change those earlier minutes. Are people understanding that and okay with it? Okay.
Should there be a general disclaimer on every set of minutes that says that?
Yes, and that's okay. That's what will be on the minutes for this meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions, or are folks ready to offer a motion? Nobody wants to approve the minutes? Do you want to table it or do you want to approve?
And there is no requirement in statute that minutes be approved. And there isn't an indication in the bylaws that minutes will be approved. It's a custom. So that's why I also had a question mark next to approval of minutes. If the group doesn't feel it's necessary to formally adopt the minutes, then that can be your practice also.
I'm willing to make the motion. I really think these minutes are very well presented. I'd like to throw that in on the sideline.
Thanks, Ken. So we do have a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Sarah, thank you for seconding. Dean, did you have a comment before we vote on the minutes?
I was just going to say hats off to Dea for her contribution to the minutes.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Or thumbs up does as well. Excellent. And then anyone opposed? And then any abstentions? Hearing none, the minutes have passed, and we'll include the two major comments that you've raised in the minutes. Okay, moving on.
So moving on, it's important to give a little bit of a spiel on procurement. This is kind of down in the weeds subject matter, but we have to go through it. And I'm going to just spend a minute or two talking about the material that is on the slide that you see on the screen right now. There is a section of the Clean Water Rule that addresses fiscal management. It includes several sections, and many of those have to do with procurement. Because money is involved and handling money responsibly is important, we need to cover these details. And I just want it to be clear to council members and partners that there are certain obligations that we will have and the council will have that are given to us as a result of rules. So the first paragraph that I've included on this slide, which is from subparagraph G of the rule, says, first of all, that the clean water service provider shall have a procurement policy for procuring goods and services. And it goes on to say the policy shall outline the procedures that the QISP shall follow when subgranting or subcontracting, and when the QISP implements a clean water project directly. So again, this is in rule. This is telling us, the Regional Planning Commission, as the QISP for the Missisquoi Basin, that we have a procurement policy and we have to follow it. And we follow it when we are passing money through to subgrantees or hiring contractors. The thing I would say is that the Regional Planning Commission, doing the kind of work that it does, already has a procurement policy. It's pretty extensive, and I didn't include it in the packets, but I'm happy to share it with everyone following this meeting. But the stage that's been set for us in rule is that we must have a procurement policy. The thing I would go on to say is that the procurement policies of the Regional Planning Commission were put in place before we became a QISP. And so they're not ideally suited to doing all of the things that a procurement policy should do now that we are a QISP. So we are in the process of changing the procurement policy, and I'll be giving a broad strokes outline of that in a bit. I also want to then just move on to the next paragraph that's in the rule. And this is important, and it may generate some questions. The subparagraph H addresses pre-qualification, and I'll just summarize pre-qualification as a procedure that can be used that hopefully speeds up getting work done within the constraints of financial responsibility. So the paragraph in rule says subgrantees and subcontractors may be pre-qualified through a request for qualifications process that is implemented by the QISP, by the councils. I'm sorry, by the QISP, the Clean Water Service Providers. The language in the rule goes on to say that when an organization or business is pre-qualified, then they hold that status for 3 years. So you only have to do it once, and then it's good for 3 years. And furthermore, the rule says that this process that the QISP uses has to be opened up every year so that new organizations and new contractors can put their hat in the ring, so to speak. So again, the rule is saying pre-qualification is allowed, and that it must be reopened every year, and that the status is valid for 3 years. Now, the thing I'm just going to spend a moment talking about now is subgrantees and subcontractors. I'm going to say that the phrase or the word subgrantee can be thought of as another word for partners. There are partner organizations that in many circumstances going forward will be receiving money from the QUISP and can be thought of as subgrantees. So just generally speaking, think of subgrantees as organizations. Think of subcontractors more as people or organizations with machinery. Just generally speaking, think of them in those two ways. So we have had some kinds of, we've had language in our procurement policy at the Regional Planning Commission recognizing these things, but not to the extent that we feel we need to have them because of the QUISP process.
Derek, do you have a comment? I'm sorry, Derek, Dean.
Go ahead, please.
If there's a natural break, I see that Barry has his hand up.
Yes.
Totally understand subgrantees. What would be the distinction between contractor and subcontractor? So if the council wanted to contract with somebody, company that may provide services more than one time, just wondering about that distinction. I understand that a subgrantee, an organization could hire somebody with machines, that would be a subcontractor. Just wondering about the contractor subcontractor distinction.
Yeah, and it's really, this could have been, this is the language from the rule. I think conceptually, the word sub doesn't really need to be there, but because the requirements will pass through to the next level. So the distinction between contractor and subcontractor isn't really meaningful. It may describe a situation to indicate the level below. It's relative, in other words. It's describing the level below a particular level. So you have a contractor and then the subcontractor is the one below that, but then you can have subs and subs. And like I said, it's not really, the distinction between contractors and subcontractors isn't really meaningful because the requirements are the same. So I'm punting a little bit, but I'm trying to keep it simple and straightforward in that contractors can have subcontractors who can have subcontractors that may not be likely in many projects, but the requirements will be the same. So as long as a business is pre-qualified, they will meet, they will be eligible for this process. So to put a point on this, in the procurement procedures, if there is a partner organization that is a subgrantee, they want to use a contractor to do a particular project. If that contractor isn't pre-qualified, if they haven't gone through a process, then the subgrantee or the grantee will have to go through a competitive process to get that contractor. The procedures that we've written also say, though, if that grantee or that partner wants to choose a contractor that has already been pre-qualified, then their process can be simplified. So there is an incentive for organizations to use contractors that have been pre-qualified, but they're not required to do that. A subcontractor or a contractor that has been pre-qualified can move forward on the project more quickly than one that hasn't. And that's the whole purpose of this. This idea of pre-qualification is intended to make it once you've gone through the hoops to get work done more quickly. And I'll describe it a little bit more in a couple of graphics, but the requirements will pass through is the short answer I will give. And maybe we need to speak more offline, or I'll take another step today, but in the interest of time. And if it's okay, the last paragraph, I just wanted to touch on, the rules go on to say some things that bear discussing or exposing. So procurement, services, and goods. So except for entities that have been chosen pursuant to a specific, what this first language in I is saying basically. So if the council has pre-qualified an organization, let's just call it organization X, that organization can go forward and do work. And if that organization itself is doing the work, nothing further is required. They're pre-qualified, they can do the work without any further hoops. However, if that organization is going to hire someone to do the work, as it says here, services, procurement of services by the QUISP or its subgrantees shall be a competitive process with the solicitation of quotations from at least 3 qualified entities. So I'm drawing attention to this, and maybe it's just going overboard, to make it clear that we're being told through this process that things have to be competitive. So it's going to be a challenge, it's going to be a drag on efficiency, but until the rules are changed or until there's further guidance from the DEC, we will be telling people in the process that they have to use solicitation of bids. As it goes on to say, there are some exceptions. So if there's a purchase that's valued at less than $1,000, then it doesn't require that. There's a lot of administrative overhead is the bottom line. And then in the interest of time, I think what I'm just going to do is flash to these graphics, and hopefully that will make a bit more sense. Our intention as the QUISP is to have a request for qualifications that's issued to partner organizations. They will respond and we will evaluate them in using criteria that are specific to partner organizations. When they demonstrate that they've met those requirements, they will be selected, that will be documented, and they will be contracted with, and going into a project, they will be given authority to do particular expenditures through task orders.
Okay, so now this is
okay.
And Dean, I see that Lauren's hand
I just
is
type
up.
something in, and then
Sorry, Dan.
I assume this is the post thing.
Just enter and it'll go in.
I have to run soon, but if there is any room to push back on DEC about that competitive process, I would be in full support. I think, you know, for the block grants, they let us follow our own procurement policies to hire subcontractors. And so that's just something to think about as a precedent. And also, I feel like it could, that based on what I know of where this work may go in terms of like stream restoration and floodplain restoration, there's like 4 people in the state who are qualified to do that. And I feel it almost feels extractive to be asking them to be repeatedly coming up with proposals and solicitations, knowing that they'd only get a quarter of them. And especially if there's already precedents for a firm working literally in the same sub-watershed. So if there is any room on that, I would love to support that just kind of topic. I know that's probably more specific for engineers than like a construction company, but I feel like having Bennett Water Resource Engineers. So there's like 5 people who can design the projects we're planning to design. Thanks.
Yeah, what I would say, Lauren, is that the QUISP are looking for ways that we can get this simplified, and that could include having a single pre-qualification process that applies to multiple basins, so that those engineering companies could all become pre-qualified engineering firms, let's just say, and it doesn't matter, they would have pre-qualified status across all of the basins, so they're only doing it once, or something very simple like that. And as I understand it, what that would mean is the, let's say the district as a sub-grantee, as the partner, would be able to then just go and get 3 bids from those, if all of those 4 or 5 firms that do this work statewide are pre-qualified, you've saved a step, because then all you need to do is to get 3 quotes, because you've been pre-qualified, they've been pre-qualified, and then the only requirement is that you get the 3 quotes. That would be great. We would love to make it as simple as that. That's what our hope is. But if those organizations, those engineering firms don't bother, then you might face a choice where, oh, we have 3 of the 5. Yeah, and they're not doesn't include the one we'd really like. So what are we gonna do? So we would hope that we can get as many pre-qualified, and I know other QUISP planners have been saying, they want to open the gates, get everybody pre-qualified so that it can be a simpler process.
Gotcha. So it's really just it's a quote. It's not necessarily a proposal from each of the pre-qualified folks. It's just a number at the end of the day, as opposed to a proposal.
Yeah, the words are solicitation of quotations from at least 3. So I take that to mean it's tell us the bottom line, not writing proposals, because this process will totally break down if you were forced to do proposals, and it's not proposals.
Okay. Kent, do you have a comment on this?
Yes, in the common occurrence of contacting 5 or 6 firms to do a project and only getting 1 response, I'm interpreting this as saying that we're obligated to put out 3 bids, that we are 3 contacts to bid, and that we are not being obligated to actually come up with 3 firms that are supplying an actual bid. Am I right in that?
That would be my view, because it says with a solicitation of quotations. So maybe I'm splitting hairs, but my reading of the language in the rule is that the requirement, the threshold, is the solicitation from at least 3. It isn't the delivery. Maybe someone from DEC would say I'm wrong, but that's not how I read that.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way it works on many occasions, is you only get 1 response or 2 responses, even though you've done your very best to contact everybody you think appropriate. So I'm glad that that's the way it's being looked at. And then I'm hoping that what we're saying here is that these firms are only going to have to go through this process once. In fact, they're not going to have to go through a DEC process and then go through a QUISP process, that we are actually streamlining this to only obligating the firms to do this one time.
Right, except that after 3 years, it runs out. And my understanding is that they would have to go through it again, although at that point, we could have a process that makes reestablishing your pre-qualification status very simple.
Yeah.
But yes, at least 3 years, they will have done it and they're good for those 3 years. Yeah. And I am not aware of anything that says that they have to get a prior approval through DEC. It's going to be the QUISP's process.
Dean, we deal with this a lot on the municipal level when we're applying, like for VTrans municipal grants. They have an ATR process where you're supposed to select from one of their consultants that they have. I think they issue 3-year RFQs. And so you're supposed to select off of their list. But if we as a municipality have a similar process with our own RFQ and our own contractors for whatever sector it is, they allow us to use our own as opposed to theirs, as long as we still adhere to their system moving forward. So I'm sure we could get the same allowance from DEC with this if we issue our own RFQ. And then you also have the flexibility of choosing off of their list or choosing off of our own list.
I hear you. I've used the VTrans process for a project in the past. I don't understand that DC has any intention to mimic VTrans in this respect. I'm not aware of it, because we are facing the language and the rules that were hashed out over a pretty long period, not that long ago, that says this is the process. But maybe in the next iteration of the rules, there's nothing in the rule language that says if the partner organizations, the sub-grantees, have established processes, then they don't have to use this other process. Maybe someday. Are there any other comments that are hands up that I haven't seen? I think that perhaps the thing to do is to move on from that discussion. I'm happy to share information or address follow-up questions if people have them, but how does it sound that we move on to the next agenda item, which has to do with the public participation policy? Are people okay with that?
Dean, just to clarify for the group, that on the procurement policy, the procurement deals, the clean water service provider is in charge of all of that. So it really is the role of the council to be aware of the process and provide any feedback, but it will be the clean water service provider's procurement. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, these will be the Northwest Regional Planning Commission's procurement policy that's updated, in the process of being updated, to specifically address the QUISP rule and its requirements. But it will be, as soon as I get Catherine to say this red line version can be shared, then I will share that, but I can share the existing procurement policy immediately. And there is some discussion going on across regions to standardize. Some of the regions have procurement policies that are very similar already, but I think that the hope of having one procurement policy written across all the QUISP wasn't really feasible, because there are some regional variations. But it will be the Northwest Regional Planning Commission's procurement policy that we're dealing with, and so it's not having to go to Montpelier or Waterbury or Barrie to fight the fight. It's having the conversation regionally. Okay.
So Dean, we're moving on to number 6, initiate discussion of public participation policy, which there was a draft that was included in the mailing.
Right, and slide on the screen now gives a little bit of context for this. There is a section of the Clean Water Rule that governs public engagement. And it says that the QUISP will have a public participation policy, and it spells out what the minimum requirements are. So we must ensure public notice of the meetings and decisions and actions. So we must achieve public notice, and Catherine touched on some of that at during her presentation last time. But more to the notion of public engagement, item 2 promotes public participation in an open, competitive, and transparent process for identifying and selecting projects, with specific consideration given to minority, limited English proficiency, and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities and stakeholders. So this, again, is from the Clean Water Rule. Our attempts at public engagement need to promote involvement with diverse communities in as open and transparent a way as we can. And then third, the rule says that we comply with the agency's non-discrimination policy, and I can share that. There's also a guidance document that DEC has drafted. It hasn't been finalized, but I've used the language thinking that it will probably be similar to this. That guidance language says, in their proceedings, the Basin Water Councils and their respective QUIS should at all times implement the formula grants in a manner that promotes the mission of securing clean water advancement while considering equity and inclusivity. So this is the background for the document that was included in the packets. We are thinking that it would be helpful to adopt an initial policy and then perhaps work on a more substantial policy over time. But this is why we are here. It's why we are proposing this policy in the first place. It's because of these requirements that have been provided to us. So I'm going to just pull up that document, and people will be free to give me whatever comments they have. So I'm hoping everybody can see that now. So as I mentioned, this is being suggested as an interim policy, with the idea being that more work will be done. And the language is very, very simple initially. It's essentially parroting what is in those documents that I just showed you. It does make an attempt to flesh out some things by listing some practices, and then goes on to say that it will be amended. Any thoughts, questions, comments on that? And people can see it, right?
Do you mind just zooming in just a little bit? I know it's in.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Yes. Yeah.
Testing all our eyes. And so again, Dean, you're looking for comments from the council with the thought of making any revisions and then an adoption anticipated for the next meeting, if it's ready.
Yes.
Great.
I will also say that the Regional Planning Commission is doing a fair amount of work in this area. It's an effort that's started in January. I might describe it as something that we expect will take a year or more. The DEC is working on this topic as well, as are many other agencies around the state. So a lot of attention is being given to changing how we do things and making them more inclusive. And I will be the first person to admit that this first version is really saying very little, but it sets a marker in the ground. And the intention would be that when the council, if the council says, yes, we're putting our names to this and subscribing to it, it would be signed perhaps by the chair on behalf of the council, and it would also be signed by the QUIS.
So Dean, we can continue to take any comments that council members have, but I'm wondering, Dean, would you accept any comments or questions from individual members from now until before the next meeting as well to compile?
Yeah, ideally sooner rather than later, so that if I'm including an updated version in the packet, then it can incorporate those comments.
And I did see that Lauren unmuted herself for a moment. Lauren, did you have a comment?
No, sorry, my phone lost service.
No worries.
Okay. So yes, comments welcome. Realize that the packets didn't get out as early as I'd hoped, but please feel free to share ideas and do again understand that there's really no there's no shortening the process that needs to take place for what would be a permanent policy, and this is really a marker. If that's something that isn't generating any more discussion, then perhaps I'll stop sharing it.
So Dean, are you feeling comfortable about moving on to the housekeeping part of the agenda, the summary, the scheduling and conclusion?
Yes, I am. If that's okay with people.
And Dean, just as a heads up, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to pop off so I can get the staff meeting ready, log in.
Yes.
So if you don't mind wrapping up once I tap out.
Absolutely. So folks, what I've got on the screen now is a picture of what we think the next 3 months or more could look like. We have envisioned that we could just conclude the discussion on the bylaws in May, knock on wood. We perhaps could conclude discussion on the public participation policy, if that's agreeable to folks. I have in the second box, provide comment on guidance to subgrantees. So this is pointing to the fact that the QUISP is required to provide guidance to the partners that will be doing a lot of the work. And that guidance should be helping them understand what's the process going to be for getting engaged. And we are working on that. It's possible that the guidance that we will provide is in the form of multiple documents. There might be a one-page graphic or infographic that has the steps laid out. And then along with that is a draft of the actual request for qualifications, but it will be some document or documents that we will hope convey to subgrantees what steps they will need to follow. So that's something that we hope the council can take up in May, assuming that everything is pulled together in time for that. And then another item on that agenda would be, if can be scheduled, is a presentation on the tactical basin plans and the priorities that are included in the tactical basin plans. And I'm not sure if Karen is still on, and Karen Bates is the basin planner who many of you or most of you know. So if that's possible, that would be on the agenda. We have more things on this list than are probably realistic, but we wanted to just float them. And now that we have a chair, we can discuss this further with the chair. We're thinking of initiating a feature of every meeting that we would call the partner of the month, or the project of the month, or the partner and their project of the month. So we have that included on this overall schedule. And then we might also have, for her consideration and your consideration, some kind of presentation on the council putting together an annual, it's called the annual work plan, but it's really, what would the council's goals be for the coming year? So think of it as something like that. This graphic also shows what we might be looking ahead at in June and July. I've also got mentioned some possible training topics. The DEC is working on some training. They have a page that there's a link to on this. I believe everyone should have received an email that I sent out earlier that has a link to a new YouTube video where they have the first of what I think will be many training topics covered. But DEC is also working on other training topics, and it's possible that in June there could be some kind of training on the development of projects. And then in July, they are also looking at some training having to do with Indigenous perspectives. But anyway, hopefully this chart, which I can share separately, gives people some idea of what things will be like in the coming months. Our thinking is monthly meetings through July. Because August tends to be a slow month, we expect that there would not be a meeting in August unless the group really wants it. And then we're thinking that as of September, we could see the councils starting on an every other month schedule rather than quarterly schedule, just because we think that there still will be enough to do that would warrant more than quarterly meetings. Any questions, comments, thoughts, editorials about that?
I see Barry has a question, comment.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any ballpark sense of when projects start or applications received, or when we start doing the work?
Yeah, there is a ballpark sense, but sometimes the deadlines get moved. I mean, in theory, money can be, that's included in the budget for the fiscal year would be online and on July 1. But do I think the processes will be in place where people are getting money shortly after that? No, but I believe that this is what we're trying to get at with the training having to do with project development and processes would be happening in May and June, so that as soon as we can, money can start flowing. We know that one of the first opportunities that the councils and the councils and the QUISP have is to decide what projects that have been done in the last few years we want to try to take credit, I'll call it take credit for, but think of it as capturing the phosphorus credit for. And so there will be some work for the council to do there. And this is not directly answering your question, but it's going to be one of the important things that's project related that the council will need to do. And that is to look at a list of projects that have been done in the last 5 years and help decide which ones it makes sense to add to our ledger. Now, another thing will be to figure out how to get money out the door for projects. And there will be some number of projects, but one of the things there's a strong need for is getting money in the hands of the partners so that they can do project identification and development, so that we are priming the pump and building a list of actual projects. And 7% of the funding available through the formulas will be available for that purpose. And I think that one of the first things in terms of getting money out the door that the councils will do or be involved in is figuring out how does that 7% how can that be distributed to the partner organizations so that they can apply it to project identification and project development. So 7% of that total will be, I got the number somewhere, but it was, I think, shared at a previous slide at the meeting last week. There will be some projects that will be developed enough where the council will need to prioritize them and can then consider funding them, but the council will need to understand, well, what process will it use to prioritize in order to determine which ones get funding? That's a conversation that I think will take place in the May, June, July timeframe, and that's going to determine how quickly out the door. I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's a more complicated question than it seems like at first glance. As soon as possible is the short answer.
I'm just wondering if, I'm assuming that money is flowing through other channels for projects this year during this construction season.
Right, we are in a transition period, and there are grant programs that are continuing that will be winding down over the next year. And then the responsibilities of the QUISP and the books will be ramped while the QUISP and the books are ramping up. And I think that among the dollars that are most helpful and most important for the partners will be this project identification and development money. Okay, other questions that I'm not seeing here?
Dean, in relation to communication with municipalities about projects, would you have any examples of the types of projects that would be considered from the QUISP perspective, particularly in relation to them being non-regulatory? I'm just thinking it'd be easier if we had a list of types of projects when we were communicating with the partners.
I have a list that I can send you, and I will share that with the group.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that will be helpful. There are so many, part of the challenge I think is that there are so many project types that are eligible that it's maybe more than some communities would even want to consider, but we will do our best to give you a list that you can share with communities and use examples.
And of course, you know, if there would be any financial burden on the community, you know, just you know, a discussion about the funding in relation to, you know, you identify a project, so now are you stuck paying for it? That type of thing.
Yeah, I think I follow, and this is where and others on this call, and I'll get to Karen in just a second, but others on the call understand this. There needs to be some money spent to determine whether or not something is really going to be viable, if that's what you're getting at.
No, I'm thinking more of if I were a select board member and, you know, somebody like me came in and said, oh, we're looking for projects, their response is going to be, how much do we have to pay for it?
Okay. Well,
which I think should be, with the way things are set up right now, I think the answer to that should be the municipality shouldn't have any financial burden, but I would like to get some confirmation on that for, you know, future communications.
Okay. I will do my best. I hear you, and yes, I share you. I believe the answer is the one that you gave, but we'll try to give you something that you can use. And Karen,
thank you.
If you were next, I'm not sure if you were. I see two hands now. Oh no, I see.
So I just wanted to answer Beth's question too with introducing a resource that we just sent out. So you probably haven't seen it yet, Dean, but we've developed a query that you could use with the Watershed Projects database that will give you a good sense of projects that would be eligible for QUISP funding. And that then can be downloaded into a spreadsheet, and it, you know, can be used by anyone to further winnow down to projects that would be of interest to your area.
Yes, that's very true, very helpful. And checking out the database is something that's gotten easier with this new query, this ability to ask a question of the database to produce a list. So yes, we will follow up with that. Are there any other questions as we're getting to 10 o'clock? Something that we have not talked about that I'm hoping we can just get others to weigh in on is meeting and establishing a regular meeting schedule. I'm mindful that this is an imposition on your time. The time and day that we're meeting now may not be what works best for people in the long term, but what are people's thoughts on setting a regular meeting date and time? Would people like to chime in on that? Or should we continue to poll folks and determine their availability on a month-by-month basis? Any thoughts?
Could we set up a regular meeting time for fiscal year 23, but maybe for the end of this year, still keep going with the doodle, just because I feel like most people probably already have things scheduled.
I think that's a great suggestion. And it would be my inclination to do something like that, because I feel like what's working now may not be what is going to be fitting in people's schedule when things are a little bit more normal. So without objection, then that's how we will proceed. And we will be following up with you, Lauren, very soon. If there are no closing comments that people would like to make, I would be so bold as to step in for Bethany and take a motion to adjourn if there is one.
So moved.
I understand that motions to adjourn require no seconds.
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. And any objections? Any abstentions? Thank you all very much, folks. And we will be talking to you soon. Thank you. Congratulations to you for completing the second meeting.